What's up, coaches? This is Tad, and today we're going to continue with part 2 of our 2-part series titled Blueprint for an Empire. Today, Coach Clack and I are going to dive deeper into how he assembled leadership teams for alignment and the strategies and systems he put in place to drive desired results. So I hope you enjoyed part 2 of this series, Blueprint for an Empire. All right, Adam, we're back. Last time we talked about casting our vision, and this time we're going to move more into building that alignment with your leadership teams and then implementing those strategies in order to build that empire. But before we do that, take me back. Let's recap where we left it with casting your vision. What were the 5 main questions we just discussed?
Right, yeah, man. Great to be back. And again, just for the viewers out there, this is the overview. There's a lot going on, and we're trying to give you as much as we can and give some depth and go deeper into certain things, because I always want people to have tools. You know, if you're going to sit and be with us for an hour and a half, I want you to be able to take something away. But I felt like this kind of scope of seeing everything from a 50,000-foot view would be a good starting place as we bolt onto these as we move forward with this academy and with our tools. So we have kind of those 3 big objectives that you were talking about, of casting our vision, building our leadership teams to drive that vision, and then actually, putting boots on the ground and implementing our strategies. And so in that interview process, right, that's where that vision casting starts, and that's the, as we said, the blueprint, the framework of what you're building. So you want to answer those 5 questions. Why are we here? Your North Star, your purpose statement. We're always building to that. You're going to anchor that down with really questions 2 and 3 is, how do we behave? Those become my core values. Then we drill those down into behavioral statements. And then, what must we do for success? Those are 2 parts of a whole to me, because you've got your behavioral piece on one side, and now you've got your actual, how are we going to produce results at what we do? We play football. So you want to outline those strategies. And if you go back, I wanted to make sure that these weren't strategies that were going to really change over time, and that they were really encompass the entire team, not just individual units and things of that nature. So again, we're thinking big picture here, things that everybody can get behind. Then we come back with what's most important now, and that even though it changes year to year, it will still always align and funnel back through, questions 1, 2, and 3. So we create those common purposes every year, and then we'll have objectives and priorities as we go through our phases of the season. And then 5 is who must do what. That's really where part 3 of what we're going to talk about here, where we really start implementing those strategies. We start defining those roles. We start defining expectations and accountability measures, and we're also outlining what how will we measure success, both from a year to year, from a program, week to week, as we start to play, getting back into those strategies, and also individually. How are we going to measure success that actually produces results? And we put a lot of thought into those things.
So if we follow those 5 steps, we have a great interview process. We're fortunate enough we get the job. It's now day 1. We're sitting in our office. What's Adam Clack doing?
So that brings us to the second piece, right? You've casted that vision, and you're going to continue now that you've done that with the administration team, which I'm assuming will be in your interview process. You now got to go out and start recruiting your teams, right, and building your teams and sharing that vision with them, which is great, right? We want to cast it, but it's just a vision until you get people who are actually helping you disseminate that vision throughout. Let's just say in an average program, you've got 150 players, you've got a community, you've got administration and a whole faculty in a school. You can't, as one person, reach out and touch and influence all those people. You have to do it through leadership teams. You're going to continue to drive your message for clarity to your leadership team, and with a football program, it's teams, and we'll talk about that. And you're always soliciting feedback from them, so it's really a 2-way kind of communication. What you see as we talk about the blueprint and making sure there's clarity with that, but then, hey, it's really important. What's going on that I need to know about? Give me that feedback, and so you're building this 2-way communication.
So talk to me. What are these teams that you're talking about here?
All right, so when you look at the structure of a high school football program, there's really 4 leadership teams, right? The first one, you're really not really not the head of. That's your administration team. You're a leader in that, but that's a unique leadership team within itself. The next one is your booster club, your parents, your community. That's going to be a big piece of what you need to align this and get the support from. So you got your booster club and your administration team, and I say that's kind of a half of what we're talking about. That's your organizational and your procedural group over here. Well, then you've got your performance group, and that's the one that I'm sure we're all focused on, and as we should. This is the one you're going to be working with most closely on a day-to-day. And then that's your staff and your players. So you're going to want to be building and working with leadership teams with all 4. But again, I go back to they really do kind of break and disseminate into an operational and procedural side and a performance side. And what I've come to find out is the role of the head coach, and what makes it really hard is you're the one in the middle of all of that. And, me and Coach Sly, my AD at Milton, had a very interesting conversation one day, and he brought up this term. He says, everybody looks at what we're doing from the outside, and they see this clean kind of vision, and everything looks nice. He goes, they don't know what's going on behind. It's like a tapestry, like a rug. We're back here, flipping switches and putting out fires constantly, but with the whole goal of everybody on the outside seeing this clear, easy vision. Well, I started thinking about that, and I was like, well, it's really like that with these leadership teams. I want, with my organizational side, my administration and my booster club, I want them to be able to handle as much of that and funnel it through me so that my performance teams, my staff, my players, they don't have to worry about those things. They show up, all they got to worry about is playing ball. Let me take care of the logistics. Let me take care of making sure the meals are there. If we're traveling, you don't need to worry about those things. The more we can kind of funnel those headaches and that friction away from my players and staff, the more they can focus on playing ball. Well, conversely, the performance side has their own tapestry going on. And I want to make sure that funnels through me so it doesn't wind up on my organizational plate. So I'm thinking about things like player behavior. I'm thinking about staff behavior. I'm thinking about the way we represent ourselves. And then obviously making sure that our results and our performance is taken care of. Because if that becomes a problem for my administration, or my administration and booster club issues become a problem for my performance side, then neither are going to perform as well as they should. And we're going to have issues. So that's a big thing to think about, and something that you got to wrestle with a little bit. Is your job as a head coach is to make sure that you almost kind of keep those two, not separate, but you want to minimize the problem so that each can just kind of benefit from the successes from one another.
So let's go a little deeper here so coaches can kind of get a better understanding of this. Let's walk through each of these teams. Talk to me through administrative team.
These can become conversations all into themselves, right? But just some high-level things that I think you would want to think about with your administration team is, this is your boss, right? This is your principal, this is your AD. So the first thing I think you want to do, and you hopefully have done this in your interview process, but you want to be doing it consistently, is you want to be asking great questions and setting priorities with this group. I think about, the first question I always ask is, what is most needed from me? I am here for a reason. There's a job opening. There's going to be some unique challenges. There's something that might not be setting right with you. What is it that I need to help fix for you? Right? So I want to always keep that front of mind and make sure I have a plan for that. And then the second one, and this is, builds into just kind of what I would say with everyone needs to know this, is how will my success be measured? What exactly is it that, not just the problems you need me to solve, but now that we're going to solve those, what are the things that I must make sure I prioritize to stay in good relationships with you and make sure that everything's, going the way we want it to go. So then you go from those questions, and now you come back, and this is the two-way street, right? This is, I'm getting their vision, and now I've got to give some feedback from me. So if this is what you want, this is what I absolutely need, and I'm going to prioritize those things. And this is, my biggest wants. This is what's going to help me, get us to the next level. And I think when you can have open, clear communication with that, and you are in alignment together, which you should be if you're being open and honest and everybody's giving their authentic selves in the interview process, you then start mapping out the things that are going to help you have success. And again, things of need, and I'm talking like this could be staffing. Hey, I need to find ways to get these key people in the building. What can you do to help me there? Or it could be a logistics thing. Maybe there's a class you need to create to put your football team in it, so it helps you with those things, right? Those are things of need I think about. Could be a facility issue. Then you get down to things of want, like, okay, well, if we can build to these things as well and try to map out a roadmap to get there and have honest effort on both sides, I think that's where great alignment starts to happen with that team.
And talk to me a little more about Booster Club, because that's the second part of this procedural, organizational side of the leadership matrix.
Yeah, just for my young coaches out there, there will be a whole course on this, but just to kind of give you, again, just some ideas about working with a Booster Club effectively. The first thing I would say with this one is setting clear boundaries. Make sure you have clear boundaries with this group. You're going to have to work with them a lot. It is a really, again, unique relationship that you're going to have here, because you're asking guys to really sacrifice a lot of time, and it's going to be a lot of work. But, there's also that idea that every one of them are probably parents, and at the end of the day, we can have a great relationship, but I know where priorities lie, and I'm not, as they should. So the first thing is setting clear boundaries and really doing your best to hold those. And obviously, I'm talking about things like this is all about our role as a Booster Club is to support this program. Period. I want you to help me with getting parent involvement for volunteerism, things of that nature that's going to help, support our staff, support our players, help us get into the community. And then obviously the financial piece, right? Keep us in good standing, help us raise the money, help us do those type of things and be good stewards of this program, so that, again, we can go out and try to achieve these things we want to achieve. So, on day one, you're meeting with those officers. Who's here, right? And you should interview them very similar to the way that you do with your staff. These are going to be the people that you really lean on, and when you find good ones, man, you want to hold on to them. Because when you find good ones, just like with your staff, like I'm an offensive guy, and so I'm going to go out and find a great defensive coordinator, and I want to delegate to him those roles. And I want to let him do his job, just like I will with this Booster Club. I want to be able. The goal for them is they can take things off your plate, and they're going to have great skill sets, whether it's out getting sponsorships or, helping you manage your budget and things like that. So you want to delegate those things to make your life easy. But I also would put a caveat to that: do not separate. You got to make sure you're still plugged in and you understand what's going on, that you're abreast, that you're not, just delegating so much and then removing it, because I don't think any of us got in the business to be Booster Club presidents, right? We got in here to be football coaches, but you're the head coach now, so you're the CEO. So, I would say that's a big key there. Find those great officers, set your boundaries with everyone, okay? Delegate these key responsibilities that we'll outline, in a later presentation, but don't separate. Then as you go and these relationships continue to evolve, I just say just be careful. You don't ever want to accidentally or consciously make any kind of promises that's going to jeopardize the integrity of how you run your program. I always made this statement, I never, and I don't care who it is, whether it's the principal, whether it's Booster Club president, whether it's somebody, I never wanted to make a promise that would compromise my integrity. I didn't want to be beholden to anyone. I wanted to be able to make decisions as I see fit for this program, and as long as I'm doing that with integrity, then I should keep my job, as long as we're producing results and we're skillful at that. So these conversations, it could be at a kickoff party, or hey, we're at a restaurant, we're just kind of chopping it up, and you're gonna ease into maybe some real friendly conversation. Just I'm not telling you don't do that, because you want those authentic relationships, but just be very careful to never make any type of promises, and just be mindful of, maybe some implications that you might be making, because you never want to be in that situation. But with that being said, you don't want to be so cold and removed that they start to feel like, what's this all for? So, I also wanted to find ways to really interact with these. I mean, we had some great ones. And great people, very skilled. So I wanted to find ways that we could build those relationships. I wanted to find ways that made it worth their time. I mean, let's be honest. Nobody just gives up that time for no reason. And the great ones put in an absurd amount of time. So, whatever it is it, hey, finding some time to talk a little ball on the side where they're getting a behind the scenes look at what's going on with our strategies, maybe why something worked, something didn't work. Is it, extra access to maybe some practice? Is it just making sure that you take the time to write thank you cards and give Christmas gifts, or do a separate dinner with just you and the officers and maybe some of the other coaches and things of that nature. So I think when you kind of have that healthy balance of being personable, but also, again, being guarded enough, I think you have an opportunity to have a really, really healthy relationship with that club. And man, it's so important, because they really are the conduit. They are the conduit to the parents and to the community. And like I said, there's 4 pieces to this. There's the administration, there's the community, there's your staff, and there's your player. If any one of those break down, if you lose any one of those teams, the entire structure can fall.
So let's talk about the performance side of things now, the coaching staff and players and building those teams.
Right. The most important thing, and let's make sure we're clear about this, the most important thing of this whole thing is the players. We're doing this to go back to the stated objective. We're building men of integrity. All right. And I put a lot of thought into this. So how do I, as a head coach, do that? Well, I've got to manage the operational side at least adequately. But the best way that I can impact these players is surrounding them with great men on our staff and making sure that I help lead these guys who can then go out and lead these players. The very first thing I wanted to do was get in front of everyone, and cast that vision like we talked about. But then I'm starting to disseminate, these profile sheets. I call them, there's a coach's kind of profile sheet and there's a player profile sheet where I'm just mining for information. Very simple in nature, just some general questions about why do you like ball? What are some things going on in the program that you love? What are some things that you would like to change? And I'm mining that information. And then that first 2 to 3 weeks, man, my entire calendar is going to be booked up with one-on-one meetings. I'm going to lean on my administration and people who've been there to help me identify the players that I must meet with first. Typically your seniors, any flight risk. Again, you're taking over a program. There's a lot of excitement, but there's a lot of nervousness too. And then obviously just who they've identified as, hey, this guy's clearly one of the leaders and influencers. You want to make sure you meet with him. And then obviously any coach on staff. Right? We got to figure out. And high school's unique. You don't just come in like college and remove everybody and bring your own group in. You've got to work within a system. So who's already on campus? I want to start meeting with those guys, figuring out, again, who's going to be on the bus, who's going to be off the bus, and we'll worry about where their seat is on that bus a little bit later. But I've just got to make sure real clear, like, is this guy staying? Or is he leaving because of, whatever our conversation was, and is this guy align or not? So that's step one, and that's kind of what I call, building these teams. And kind of think about it in phases, right? Like you want to build these teams, and then you want to bridge them. So we got to get the right people in, and these kind of start to form the group, and then you got to start bridging them, right? And so what I mean with the players is I'm going to bridge me and them to the rest of the group. What are some things that you guys are really craving? I'm looking for some easy wins here. I can remember, something simple like, hey, we just really would love, music at practice, or, to be able to have more say in the positions that we play, and just anything like that. And I can go back in there and think, well, hey, I can guarantee that fits my value. You let the guys know that's something that we're going to try to make work here. So you're kind of building those easy wins. And then again with the players, one thing, and I can remember a conversation vividly, something that really helped me was, I was looking at this young man and he was contemplating leaving. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to ask you to trust me. I'm just going to ask you for an opportunity to earn your trust. And I think that simple statement right there, where you're just kind of showing a little bit of vulnerability in a very personal level, like, you don't know me from anybody else. But if you can just give me a chance to earn it, I think you're really going to like what we got, And next thing you know, that's starting to spread throughout the team. So that's kind of what I'm talking about here, of how you start to build this critical element of alignment. With the coaches, it's a little different. You've got essentially 3 staffs coming together. So that's what I'm talking about bridging. You've got the staff that was there that you're going to keep. You've probably identified, a number of coaches that are coming with you, who have worked with you. And then you're probably going to still be filling in gaps as you're going to go out and make some hires. So there's really 3 different entities coming together all at once. You got to bridge that. And 2 critical things that I think we did that I would advise for anyone. One is, I made a very, very clear and conscious effort to never say better. We're going to do this because it's better. Because you're going to ask these guys to stay and coach with you, and then you're just going to turn around and just kind of crap on everything that they've done. They've probably been doing some great things, There's probably some really good things. And just because your way is not that doesn't mean that was wrong and this is right. I'm very careful with that, because I think that, just from an emotional piece, can be an issue right from the jump. So I always just made a point of saying, hey, this is different. This is just how I know to do it. This is what we believe in. Not better, but different. And I really found that to be a very good angle of just kind of like not demanding trust from my players. I'm not coming into these coaches and being like, everything you did was crap, and everything we're going to do is great. Step 2 was, we had, and we did this every year, we would have these coaches retreats off-site. It doesn't have to be fancy or anything like that. But the point of those was no ball, or no X's and O's. We weren't going to have scheme talks. I was going to build relationships. And I mean, this may sound cheesy to some people, but everybody craves this connection. And icebreaker questions are a great way to get there, And I remember that very first one we had, I had 3 questions, and we just went around the table. And it was simple. What do you love about coaching ball? Who's an influence on you? What's maybe your greatest win or biggest challenge? And I bet that conversation with 10 people lasted 2.5 hours. And there's things from that conversation that I still remember today that affected how I interacted with that coach, because I learned so much about him, and it helped me as we just worked together to kind of understand where he was coming from. And you start to see them come together. The next piece in that retreat kind of conversation was, remember, as we talked about a blueprint of this program, I didn't want it to be so ironed out and so ironclad that there was no way for others to be involved. So I remember that very first leadership or that retreat we had, we put up our strategies for success that I outlined, in presentation 1, and I outlined in our interview. I said, hey, let's look at these. Do you guys agree with all these? Is there something I'm missing? Is there some language that we can build around it and some measurements that we can build into it to really make these land home? And what we came out of that meeting was what we then rephrased as our keys to victory. And it was something that we used for the entire time we were there. So now you're starting to see these guys get their way in, which now is their buy-in to what they're seeing with this whole framework of a program.
So there's a great quote that you've said, and I want to get your thoughts on these 4 words: systems and strategies, behavior, results. This is all about implementing your strategies.
So when I talk about systems and strategies, that is, those are the things that you can repeat over and over, and you can go back and reflect on. And they should be built with intention to drive things back to what you stated as the core values and the keys to victory. The piece about measurements, right? I've heard this saying before, and I believe it. If you can't measure it, it doesn't matter, right? So it is, and sometimes it could be a more subjective measurement. Sometimes it's a clear objective measurement. But at the same time, you want to have some way of tracking these things. And this kind of gets into goal setting. This gets into expectation. This gets into, data versus stats is something else I talk a lot about. But again, you have these systems and strategies in place that are going to drive the desired behavior that you stated, and then also achieve the results that you want. And you can always go back and analyze these things. And if you're not executing the desired behavior, or if you're not executing or achieving the desired results, well, then you need to go back in and revisit your systems and strategies and figure out, this is where problem solving comes in. Is it the wrong system and strategy, or is it the wrong implementation of it?
So talk to me about establishing expectations, specifically behavioral versus procedure expectations.
I would always start with establishing these expectations, especially when we're talking, to the players and things of that nature. And with expectations, there's also an implication that there's not real good expectations if you don't have some type of accountability measure to it, right? So that's where the integrity piece of that comes in. If you're going to demand something, then you've got to hold people accountable to that. And I break these down into, again, kind of two different groups. There's behavioral expectations and there's procedural expectations. And I think it can be helpful, especially to the young coach out there who hasn't been through it, to really think about it this way. When I talk about behaviors, I want to be very careful of what I put on paper. Meaning, behaviors don't live in a vacuum. That is where you really want to be the judge of, okay, tell me exactly what happened. Let's weigh all the facts and let's go through this and figure out what needs to be done. It's a one-size-don't-fit-all type of thing. So if you start going through and putting things on paper, if this, then that, if this, then that, you are tied to that. And I got great advice from a mentor of mine, Dennis Strami. He says, you never want to put something on paper that can paint you into a corner. And another piece of that is you never want to put something on paper that can paint you into a corner, and then you're going to have issues of being able to demonstrate consistency on how you handle that situation. So now all of a sudden you're leaving a lot into potentially interpretation if you don't handle every situation the same way, but every situation isn't the same. So again, just to back up and kind of put a bow on that, when I looked at behavioral pieces, I wanted to stay kind of general. I wanted to lean on things like, the school conduct policies. I would hit the big bucket things, like, hey, no stealing, no substance abuse, things of that nature. But really what I wanted to do is drive it more from, instead of expectations, these are standards. And that kind of ties, again, back into our core values. So we would outline the standards that we want to see for our behavior, and we would coach to that. And then as you're building this into, whatever your team's rules and regulations, as you're going through your behavioral piece, there's one key phrase that I think everybody needs to make sure they put in there. Subject to coach's discretion. That, in and of itself, gives you wiggle room, especially if you didn't, put this, then that, right? Well, open to coach's discretion. Now that gives you the ability to go in and truly, not for the goal of favoritism or to be able to, let people off the hook. It gives you the ability to truly be a human being and look at situations on a case-by-case thing without, painting yourself in a corner that challenges you in what's good for the team versus what demonstrates integrity with how I handle these things. So then we get into procedures. So what I talk about with procedures, these are the things that, are the way that we practice, or, a big one is like our attendance policies, things of that nature, our off season, our in season, what we expect from that. I wanted to be as specific as I could with these. And I learned this through the years of where I wanted to be the judge and the jury when it came to behavioral issues. I didn't want to be the judge and the jury every single time there was an absence. So I wanted to be as specific as I could with these and tie the consequence to it so that everybody on the front end knows exactly what is expected. So for an instance, and let's just take our in-season attendance policy. I remember first year as head coach, it was like, there would be an absence for whatever reason. And every single time it was like I had to go into lawyer mode and litigate and figure out, was this excused? Was this not excused? What degree of unexcused was it? And then I was having to come up with, okay, so now what's the consequence? And unintentionally, I don't think that they were ever consistent. Sometimes, depending on how you feel, you may have came down a little harder. Sometimes you maybe gave an exception. And by nature, that's jeopardizing your integrity right there. You're leaving things up to interpretation. And it's creating this sense of I'm waiting to be sentenced, so to speak. So what that does is it really creates this contentious, tense behavior punishment type of scenario. So what we did with our attendance policy is we laid out exactly what an excused, unexcused, and an AWOL was, and we tied direct consequences for each offense. So for example, if it's excused, it's completely unavoidable, nothing you could have done, an emergency, there's communication, hey, there's no consequence for that. What an unexcused absence was there was communication, either before or directly after, I overslept, or, hey, this is a big one. I got to go meet with my math teacher, and the only time I can do it is during practice. Well, academics do come first, but there is something that you did that has put you in this situation to where now you can't be at practice. I'm not mad at you. I need you to do that, but I want you to understand this is an unexcused absence. And as you go back to our rules and procedures, that means there's going to be a quarter, right? 1 a week was a quarter. If you did 2 in a week, it was 2 quarters, so on and so forth. Not punitive, but understood. It really helped when, we would have, maybe a morning practice. Kids oversleep. They would show up. I said, well, I'm not mad, right? You understand what that means? Yes, sir. It's a quarter. It's like, cool, right? Cheer your team on, and we'll get you right back in there. And then the third piece, because there's different degrees of unexcused, right? Those are unexcused absences. Hey, mistakes happen, but we need to have some consequence. But then there's AWOL. That's the no-show, no-call. Once had a player who decided on Memorial, it was Labor Day weekend, he wanted to go to the lake instead of coming to practice when everybody else was there, starting running back. No show, no call. Find out on Tuesday, that's where he was. He agreed, and I said, well, that's an AWOL. That's a half. If you have 2 AWOLs, this runs for the season. This isn't weekly. You give me a second AWOL, that's going to be a game. You give me a third AWOL, we're probably talking about something around prolonged suspension or removal from the team if it becomes a consequence. So those are just some things that I think about as that's what specific looks like versus general. And then I wanted to do that with our operations, and I think everybody needs to think, what are you willing to be, the police every day about? What is going to be front of brain that is natural to you, that you determine, hey, this is something that is going to make or break us. I'm going to put my flag on this because I truly believe and I know that I will stay on top of this and guarantee that this happens. Some coaches do it with shirt tails tucked in, same color socks. Great way to build discipline. Language, things of that nature. But me, and I just know me, I will miss those things from time to time. I'm thinking about a million other things. So I didn't want to go hard on those and outline that. Like we would have conversations. What I went hard on, for me, what I wanted to outline was the way that we practice and the way that we operate. I made one promise to any team that I tested. I don't know if I can always live up to this, but I will make this promise to you. Every moment we spend together that is a team function, there will be a plan. There will be a reason for every minute that we spend together. And we're going to work to become as efficient as we can at it so that we can do more with less. And the more efficient you get, and that is my promise to you. So if I ask you to be here from 8 a.m. to 11, when 11 hits, if we're not already done, I'm stopping the coaches and you're out of here. The way we detailed practice out, and one of my favorite pieces of equipment was our practice timer. And coaches knew, and I had to train my coaches up on this. Whatever that says on that script, unless there's something that I decide we need to run that period back, when that buzzer rings, your drill is over. and they're on to the next, because now your drill is taking up somebody else's time. Because at the end of the day, I truly believe that the most valuable resource we have in life is time, and I want to respect that. And what I find is that when you start to do that, you're showing up on time, you're working with a purpose, working with urgency, you start to become more and more efficient. And everything, you've got a plan from, not hey, we're going to have this period and then we're going to mill around for 10 minutes and there's an energy kind of suck that starts to happen and people get disengaged, focus lacks. No, we were going to be obsessed with how we practiced, and I outlined exactly what I wanted to see at practice. And those were the things that I felt that we continually worked at and improved upon. But B, when we would have these kind of lulls in the season, we would always go back. All right, we said helmets on, whole price. I'm seeing helmets off. Let's go back in and reestablish expectations. People are starting to shuffle out a little later in practice, and it's not. No, let's reestablish it. Let's put consequences to it. And let's everybody be on this and hold them accountable. So that was an example of kind of how I would go specific with certain procedures that I wanted to see. As I think about it too, there's one other thing that I would highly advise. Anywhere that you can create common language that you help your coaches to start to speak to, so that your players can now understand. That not only helps you with consistency across the board, but it also helps you with efficiency. If I can boil a 20-word coaching principle down to one word, I can coach faster. He knows exactly what I'm talking about, and everybody's saying the same thing. And kind of an example of that is we were doing a ball security circuit one day, and I'm going around and I'm watching all my coaches coach the heck out of this ball security circuit. Everybody's saying great things. Everybody's saying something different. And so when I asked the players at the end, I was like, all right, tell me one of the biggest keys to ball security. I heard 5 points of contact. I heard one person say high and tight. I heard another person say 3 points of contact. I heard another person say nobody had a consistent message. And all of them were technically right. So we set out that day and said, hey, let's create a common language around ball security. And we came up with the 4 E's, right? It was eagle claw, meaning I'm going to split the nose of the ball. That was our grip. It was elbow in, making sure that we keep that ball between our elbow and our rib cage so it doesn't get punched out. And then instead of saying high and tight, we said elbow under wrist. So we got a little alliteration going. So now we got the ball there. And our fourth piece was, if you ever get, in conflict, engage wrist. So that's our fourth E right there. Which, again, just as a coaching point, if you guys don't teach that, you should. Because putting two hands on the ball actually compromises the first two of the earlier E's we talked about, and it lowers that wrist and it puts that elbow out. Actually saved Tiki Barber's career. Coach Coughlin taught him engage wrist. That thing ain't coming out. So we could teach that, and our kids we use that when we do our youth camps. We use it when we did our feeder camps. And when kids would come into our program in 9th grade, I say, what's the 4 E's of ball security? Eagle claw, elbow in, elbow under wrist, engage wrist. I'm like, dude, this is awesome, right? And so we did that as many places as we could. We did it with blocking. We did it with tackling. But those are just some examples of, as you get into setting expectations, how you can go general where you need to and then go specific where you need to.
You said something earlier in this conversation. You said, if you don't measure it, it doesn't matter. So let's talk about measurements. What are your thoughts here on measurements for the team?
This encompasses a lot of things. This gets into your goal setting strategies. This gets into your yearly goal setting. What's the kind of stated goal of the program? And as we talked about earlier, we talked about these strategies for success, where I think a lot of people will build easy measurements around the data that they get game in and game out. So I would think that one thing to note here is you can start with maybe like goal setting. You can start with more of a subjective, intangible idea. But what I think what you need to try to do is as often as you can is drill that down to specific actions that can be measured. And in that way, you have a way of tracking, you have a way of reflecting, you have a way of assessing year in and year out, if these are the stated goals, how are we going to get there? And are we measuring the right things? Or are we doing the right things to get us to those stated goals? So when it comes down to measurements, I mean, I think it's just as important as setting expectations, as important as defining roles. Identifying these things that you're going to hang your hat on and really go back and assess and work to daily, weekly, yearly are equally important.
So give me an example. What do you mean when you're saying yearly goal?
So there's really kind of two things I think about there. One we talked about earlier, right? Our common purpose. That's one way of establishing kind of one of these program-wide yearly goals, and you're going to work that down into action statements. But the other one I like to think about, again, coming out of a failure, something that I didn't like, is, what is that rally cry that hey, we are going to do this year, A lot of people go with hard tangibles. Hey, we're going to win the region. We're going to beat Team X. Hey, this year we're going to be 10-0. Right? Whatever that is, I would advise against it. I would advise against anything that is A, tangible, but B, that can happen before the season's over. So I really had to sit back, and this was in 2016. I mean, when the region was like our rally cry. So as soon as we lost that game in week 8, that we knew we couldn't win the region, you saw this complete just from the team. Everybody just kind of shut down. We can't get our stated goal. It's a loss. No, it's not. Winning the region was a step. The real goal that I realized, the real goal is to play as many games as we possibly can. If that is your stated goal, and we even started to kind of create something where instead of talking about the amount of games a class won, what a cool thing to look at is this class played the most games in program history. Because what does that mean, right? That means that you're going out and year in and year out, you're finding a way to play, in deep into the playoffs. If your goal is 10-0, dude, I can schedule you some easy wins, right? But is that what we're really trying to do? No, right? How many times have you seen a team? I've seen it many times. They finish the season 5-5, and they go on and win a state championship because they challenged themselves early in the season because they had the right priorities. I talk about, when we talk about the art of peaking, which we'll get into in a later topic, but this idea about having this long-term vision and a process to get you there, you got to be careful not to compromise that with some short-term success that actually doesn't get you closer to your stated goal. Again, which I would hope to be playing as deep as you can. So again, instead of coming up with a new kind of holistic goal every year, I settled on something that was standard for every single team because I just don't think it can get much better. And it was play as many games as we can. And how do we do that? We have to position ourselves to play our best ball when ball matters most. So that kind of gets into our thinking of how do we prep this team based on the situations that we have with this year. That starts in our January reflections. This is how we're mapping it out. But then the second piece of that, which instead of saying win the region, I just say, hey, and the next best way to do that, play our best ball when ball matters most, but position ourselves for the best, give ourselves the best position when we enter the tournament. So if that means winning the region, that's awesome. Yep, that's what I want to do first. But if we don't win the region, hey, let's get second. Let's get a home playoff game. If we don't get second, hey, let's get third or let's get fourth. Let's get into the tournament. So that built, I don't know if grace is the right word, but it built a little bit of adaptability, flexibility. You can have an off game. You can have a moment where maybe you're not playing your best ball week 6, week 7, week 8, but you still have time. Right? We still have time. Let's continue to get better because we still have an opportunity to achieve our greatest goal, which is to play as many games this season as we possibly can.
So I love that. Focusing on as many games as possible as a yearly goal. That's a great thing. So tell me more about your weekly goals. How does this tie into your weekly goals?
So this goes back to question 3, right? What are your strategies for success? And again, I want something that, as we talked about earlier, it is team oriented. It's something that everybody can get behind. I don't want to talk to the whole team about, what our offensive production is. I want to talk to the whole team about what we all can get behind. I want it to be timeless. I want it to be something that's not dependent on what my skill level is this year or who our opponents are this year. I want it to be things that are universal truths to football. I want it to be largely controllable. Again, going back to personnel, going back to opponent. What we want to do week in and week out should be more about us, not about them. And I want it to be measurable. And so I think that's kind of good to tie back in, because if I were watching the first presentation and you're talking about measurables and being specific, and I gave you my strategies for success, you're probably like, well, dang, man, that sounds very intangible and kind of out there. So that's where we set in and we go back to those keys to victory, which they are now called after our coaches retreat, and we built specific processes, and they don't have to be these exaggerate things. It's just things that you can make sure you're looking at. If these are your stated goals or your stated keys to success, they should show up weekly. And then we wanted to build some type of measurement into it. And again, so if I have one piece of advice before I get into this, coaches, get rid of the goal boards. Get rid of those goal boards that have the statistical metrics that you are checking or not checking that truly don't tie to weekly success. For example, if my stated goal is to throw for 250 yards and 70 completions and have 5 sacks and to score 35 points and only give up 7. Well, those are great goals, sure. I mean, I could tell you that those would be great things to hit. But is that necessarily what the game is going to produce? And is that something that everybody can get around? Right? I'm saying the passing. So now all of a sudden we're making the goal more about individual units and individual people. And maybe we're putting checks on that because we hit it, but then we put a big X because we lost the game. So those things, to me, they're fine to have individually. They're fine to maybe have into your unit meetings. But for the team, I only wanted to be able to put checks and X's by things that I truly thought produce results week in and week out. So that brings us to going back into our keys to victory. All right. So the first one that we started with, and just kind of going small and working back big, is we talked about the 3 non-negotiables. And then we built that language around it. I would say 3 non-negotiables. The players would say blocking, tackling, pad level, right? Kind of an emotional response there. So again, the measurement for that would generally be back into your player grades, when it comes to blocking. But we would also track our missed tackles. And then you're going to build some type of baseline with that, and then you're going to measure against that blocking, tackling, pad level. The way that we really wanted to emphasize this, and I think this was something that we kind of stumbled into, but it really made a big impact, I thought. You're obviously going to be practicing blocking and tackling all the time. But there's something to be said when you stop the entire team and say, everybody on the field right now is doing something that revolves around tackling or block destruction. Everybody. Now, you're going to do it more in your own positional groups, but even the quarterbacks, I got this nightmare of, Friday Night Lights when the quarterback breaks his neck and have you ever done a tackling drill with him? And he was like, no. It's like, our quarterbacks are everybody's going to do this tackling drill. And so weekly, even if it's just 5 minutes, we would stop practice. And everybody in this period is doing that. And again, you're showing that to your players. This is a stated key to victory, and we're going to emphasize this. The next one we talk about is, we say don't hurt the team, and players would respond with focus. So again, we're talking about these foolish penalties. We're talking about these controllable things that show up week in and week out. We don't want to beat ourselves. So our measurement for that, again, we would go back in and we would track, what are the foolish penalties versus our opponents. So set a baseline for that. All right. But also with that, I think, which is another good piece, was substitution errors. Things where, hey, we're calling a unit out and somebody didn't get there. Maybe we're calling a special personnel group or special teams. One of those things. I never wanted to have to burn timeouts or get a penalty because, our guys aren't getting on the field. So it's all about being locked in. So the way that we built processes around that, and again, this is a conversation, a deeper conversation for another day, but I'm really big into mindfulness and mindset training. So we built mindfulness into our program. And we did that in two ways. One, or I guess really three ways. One was conversations around it, leadership, character development things. Two, we hire a yoga instructor. And she starts in June with our team and works with us once a week, if not more, through the season. And she would bring in elements of, this meditative thinking, and her messages were always so spot on. But one thing I really started to do, and I love it, and they really received it when I got to Milton, was, a lot of times coaches wait to the big games and they try to do these visualization exercises, and, players are just kind of, well, what are we doing? Well, first off, we've had conversations around it. Second off, especially during home games, there's a lot of time, and there's generally about a 30 to 45 minute piece of time that's hard to fill. So when we would end our pregame meal around 4:30, we went directly to the media center. And for 25 minutes to 30 minutes, or my yoga instructor, I would bring her in, or I would do it, and I would lead them through a guided kind of meditative process. And, my only rule was no phones, no talking. If this was a time for you to just, hey, your mind is going 90 miles an hour, if you just end up shutting down and taking a nap, cool. But I got so much positive feedback from guys saying, man, this really helps me. I mean, think about all the dings and bells and things that go off in our life. Think about all the things that's going through your mind as you're getting amped up. But it was a really great way for us to calibrate. And we would really, really lean into, hey, guys, controlling our emotions, being very, very clear on what's expected of us, and let's make sure we go out and have great focus in this game, and do the things that we've talked about doing that are important for our role. So that's a process. Players are starting to see where it shows up, and then there's easy measurements there. You're just looking at your penalties. One thing I would put as I talk about that I think is interesting. All penalties aren't created equally. And you can do a study for yourself and see that. You'll see, especially in the NFL, a lot of times highly penalized teams, if you just look at base numbers, show up deep in playoffs. Because there is a difference in a foolish penalty and an aggressive penalty. If you break that bucket in half, I bet you those teams don't have a lot of foolish penalties. But when I'm talking about, somebody blocking hard on the perimeter and every now and then you're going to get a holding call, or I'm talking about a DB playing tight coverage and every now and then he's going to get a pass interference call, I don't want to coach that aggression. I just want to try to coach his technique better, but I want to keep his aggression. So I think there's a real difference in aggressive penalties and foolish penalties. So I would say be careful and be mindful of when you're going in and studying those things. Look for the things that are continually showing up and work that into practice. Key number 3 is another one of those that feels very intangible. We talk about physicality, right? Physicality through, and then the team would say pursuit and effort. But again, this turns into a way of thinking about physicality. Can you teach physicality? Yes. You can't teach a kid to be bigger. You can work on them to get stronger. And certain guys are just, hey, man, certain guys are wired up like cobras, man, and they can just strike. And that's awesome. All right? But physicality to me isn't about walking off the bus and being the most physical team in the first quarter. Physicality to me is about a team that can play hard through the echo, the whistle, pursuing the football for 48 minutes. And if you can do that time after time after time, you'll start to see the physical team may not be the one that walked off the bus as more physical, but it's the one that finished the game as more physical. So we built everything around that, around pursuit and effort. And the way that we kind of created a great system, this is one of my favorite practice strategies that we fell upon, is we created for our defensive service periods, we created a 2-whistle system. And what that means, we're not a big tackle to the ground team. There's very few times that we're going full live tackling to the ground. But we wanted to create great thud. It should be physical. Ball carrier should get stopped. We shouldn't be reaching. We should be butting him up and stopping him. That first whistle signified that the ball had been thudded. Nobody should stop until they hear that second whistle. So while the guy who thuds the runner up, he's not trying to take him down. He's actually trying to hold him up. The second, third, fourth guy, they're coming at it and they're ripping at the ball. They're trying to knock that thing out. I'm not waiting for all 11 to get there. That becomes an inefficient kind of time suck for your backside corner and your backside DN. But I will not blow that whistle until I see all 11 hats pursuing. And what's really cool is when you start doing this, that whistle is held. And there's a lot of correction. And we would build in accountability measures. Maybe we measure that throughout practice. Hey, during our 10-play defensive service, I had to hold the whistle 4 times too long. The whole team's on the line. We're going to get 4 sprints in for that. But as you build that and build that and build that, that whistle started becoming real quick. And it was phenomenal for us to start to see these guys just attacking the ball and constantly pursuing to it. And in the way that we would measure this, there was kind of 2 measurements. One was we would look at our second half point differential. I wanted to see, are we separating in the second half? Are we coming out of halftime and maybe it's 3-0, but now all of a sudden it's 37-10? That shows me that we're wearing them down. We're starting to implement and impose ourselves. And then the second way that I think everybody should be tracking, just like missed tackles, we would track loads. And we would do that on offense and defense. Because you can be physical on offense as well. I want to see guys running down the field, making that touchdown block. Or I want to see offensive linemen chasing the ball. I mean, I'll tell you, it's cool to reward a big offensive lineman with an effort play of the week when he chased the quarterback or the running back 35 yards downfield, that ball pops out and he's the one that jumps on it. So we're measuring those things and we're setting benchmarks and we're speaking to it and we're coaching to it all week. Our 4th key to victory was all about special teams. I would say, special forces, and they would say, be special on special teams. Again, just kind of emotional messaging. Now, the process for this, obviously you should be practicing special teams all the time. I think you can overdo it at times. Again, so this comes back into my efficiency kind of mindset of I wanted to get really distilled down into what we needed, how we needed it, and be executing those things. But another big piece to that, and I really come to believe this, and it was when I needed to take over as the head coach as special teams coordinator. There's just a little something different when the head coach is superly involved in something like special teams. Because I think you'll find, especially with some of your better players, they originally look at special teams as, this is something else I have to do. This is not what I'm trying to go to college at. This is not my main role, if you will. But when the head coach is involved, you start to see a lot more urgency to it, a lot more ownership in it. There's naturally a higher importance because it's something that he's putting his attention on. The other piece with this was it was really hard to measure special teams effectiveness. So we created a metric for us to measure what was the impact of our special teams in this game versus their special teams in this game. And it really works if you're familiar with baseball WAR, which has become kind of the biggest stat there, where they're saying wins above replacement. So it's basically this second baseman versus that second baseman. What was his value to the team? We created a metric. I'm not going to go through all the details here because we'll put it in the notes so people can see. But it was a metric for us to basically see, like, if we were +3, if our metric came out +3, it meant that our special teams were 3 points better in this game than the opposing teams. If we were -2, it meant that their special teams were 2 points better in this game to the total score than our special teams, and we could even break it into units. And it was really cool because I can go back through the data and just, without even thinking much about the game and see where our metrics lined up, you could see just, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, for example, we were like I don't have it in front of me, but we were like +14 one game in a second round game against a really good Marietta high school football team who went on to win a state championship. They kicked our butt on offense. They kicked our butt on defense. But we found a way to recover 3 onside kicks. We faked a punt for like a 70-yard gain, and there was a great coverage all week. We were plus 14 in that game, in a game that we only lost by a score or two when we got completely decimated on both sides of the ball. So it held weight. Again, going back to measurements, your measurement, the effectiveness of your measurement is only as good as the data you're putting into it. So if you're measuring the wrong things, it's not going to really correlate to the results. So once we've really instilled this measurement into our special teams and players could really see and have like an accurate feedback of how we did, it just kind of proved the point, right? If you measure it, it matters. That brings us to our fifth key, which to me is the most important stat in football, is turnovers, right? So we create language around that about it's all about the ball. Players would come back and say, give me that. So we're talking about protecting it on offense, taking away on defense. And this one's pretty simple, okay? You're looking at your turnover margin. And I theorize that if you have a plus 10 turnover margin for the year, you are in elite status there. You're probably going to play a lot of games, Everybody does ball security circuits. Everybody does takeaway circuit. But back to our blocking and tackling idea, there's something when you stop the entire practice and say, everybody right now for 5 minutes is working on turnovers. So that was one of our processes. But then what's cool is we got an overlap now. Go back to our 2-whistle system. What were the defense doing? Constantly attacking the ball until that second whistle came. So what did that do to our ball carriers? They learned real quick. They better have good ball security. And we started seeing the ball on the carpet a lot less, and we started seeing the ball spit out a lot more. So, again, I know everybody's going to put emphasis on that, but I think there's some little things that you can do that really show the importance. And players, again, it's about consistency. They don't want to hear it once and you do it in the first 2 weeks of practice and then you put it down and you never make a big point about it again. We're doing this weekly. All right, so that brings me to our sixth key, right? My obsession. Practice is everything. And the language we built around that, I'd say practice is everything. Players would say get paid. Again, the emotional part of that was we talked so much about if we win Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, the game takes care of itself. We're doing all this work to finally go get paid. There's a statistic that we looked up one day. Football is so unique. You work year round for 10 ball games. And within those 10 ball games, a starter of actual play time probably gets about 5 to 8 minutes. So 99% of what you do in this sport is all around preparation. And so I wanted to be obsessive about it. And I wanted to make it to where these guys are attacking it with a purpose. Naturally, you're going to have your lulls here and there, but we were going to always work to make our practice processes better and better and better and correct when they're wrong. So our measurement, which is hard, this is one that's kind of subjective, but I would rate every practice. And, did we win that day or did we lose? And the goal was to go 4 for 4. If we go 4 for 4, scoreboard takes care of itself. We at least did whatever we could do to put ourselves in advantage. And then I started bringing out a tool. And I wouldn't do this all year because it would kind of get stale. But when region started, and for us, it was generally around week 4, week 5, I'd print this board out. It was our 1% board. And literally, after practice, I would go in every day, and we either got better or we got worse. And you can kind of see, it's almost like a stock market ticker, as we're still working through our processes. And week 5, week 6, week 7, we maybe have 3 days on, 1 day off. Maybe there was 2 days off. And you just see it going up and down. And so many times around that 7-8 week mark is when we would have that reset expectations meeting with our players, and we would go back to what I talked about earlier. The expectations for practice are this. And they aren't wild and crazy. It's about showing up on time. It's about being prepared. It's about, moving with urgency on and off the field for an entire practice. If you do that, it's weird how, a 2-hour practice goes by like that, and there's just so much energy. And we would come back and we'd reset that, and then you would just start seeing this build. And it was visual, which was so cool. And then all of a sudden you built a streak. Hey guys, we've had 8 practices in a row. You don't want to break that streak now, right? And so then that became a mantra in and of itself. And even in the middle of practice, several times I would stop practice, and we had this thing called sudden change, which meant everybody goes to the sideline. And I'm like, guys, I ain't liking this right now. You gonna break your streak with 4 for 4 is the stated goal, leaders? Hey, let's change this right now. We get a down and back or whatever to reset our, recalibrate our focus. And you just started to see, it's just like habit building, The power of a streak is very powerful. And the visualization of it was cool too. I remember our state championship year in 18, we had 33 straight 1% practices. And you could just see it. I mean, and it matched. And it was just so cool to go back in every week and just say, look, guys, we didn't perform the way we wanted to. Let's look back at the board. Or, look, guys, man, we kicked butt today. Look at what we did in practice. And it just became a very emotional kind of way of messaging that was able to give measurement and to give some tangibleness to something that's so intangible. Which brings me to my last one, and I think this is the second most important statistic or data point in football, which is your red zone efficiency. And nobody really argues with one. The turnovers are kind of win and loss. But this one is what I come to believe. If you're getting into the red zone and you're scoring touchdowns or you're kicking extra points versus kicking field goals, but the other team is kicking field goals versus extra points, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out. You're probably going to win those games more times than not. So we built it all around red zone efficiency, and we would measure from a first down inside the 20 on our offense and a first down inside the 20 of the opposing offense. What is our efficiency in comparison? And we decided that around 20%, if we can be scoring 20% more times than our opponents, that's probably pretty elite. And so we would measure that every week. Hey, we were 3 for 4, 75% in the red zone, and they were 1 for 4, 25. Awesome, And it really started to build this mentality, as we would say, own the red zone, and the players would say finish. And it was that whole idea that it's not finished until the ball crosses the goal line. And this got our guys kind of buying back into, if I got to run 80 yards down the field to stop them on the 1 yard line, we still got a chance. This also goes back into, how we built our schemes out. And I think a lot of times we put an inordinate amount of time on what we do between the 20s, which is important, obviously. But if you're not building your schemes almost back to front in a way of like, okay, well, what's our answer for when we get into the hardest place to move the ball and the hardest place to stop them, which is that red zone. So we would make sure as coordinators and as a team that we were putting a lot of focus on that. But then just throughout the week, every week we're practicing high red zone, low red zone, having periods dedicated to that. We would have competition periods where it's, goal line, or, we would either start or end a day once a week with a 4th and goal from the 3. And then our players, you could just see it, like the hair on the back of their neck standing up, and coaches, hey, on the red zone. And there's just different mentality that would come about with our guys. So that's kind of what I mean by having these team-oriented, these data points that you can check that truly produce results that are timeless. This will never change. You'll never tell me that the red zone's not important, that ball security is not important, that fundamentals aren't important. I don't care who we are, what our team is made up of. If we can execute these 7, we got a shot to win a lot of ball games.
All right, there's a lot there, a lot that we just went through, but I want to try to reset it here because we started off talking about our yearly goals, and then we went down into the weekly goals and how the keys to success tie into weekly goals. So now let's talk about individual goals.
There's going to be a point in time, and we all have this, like, how am I individually going to be measured for success? And that's a very real piece of all of this. And so the first thing I would pose is a question. Do your goals and your awards individually align with your values? And what I think about that is, and this is something that fortunately I saw vividly as an assistant coach, and I immediately did when I took over, and I'm thinking about my end of year banquets. And, Coach Hepler, phenomenal coach and a huge heart, and just he created tons of goals. Tons of awards at the banquet. And, wanted to make sure he recognized as many people as possible, which I love. But at the end of the day, 2 things happen. One, it's kind of like the basketball, college basketball tournament. You can go from 64 to 68, and then 69 and 70 are going to be upset. So it doesn't matter how many goals you make or how many awards you make. But 2 is I truly did not feel we preached team. And then at the end of the year, we set out, and now we ask position coaches and coordinators and people to start finding, okay, who was the best? Who's the MVP of this? Who's the MVP of that? Who is your best receiver? Who is your best line? Because it turns into this kind of why is coach favoriting him, or he didn't recognize me? And again, it's coming from the coach to the players, and it's kind of like picking your favorite son, right? It was no good for anybody, and there was always contention at the end of these banquets. And I'm like, man, this is not a great way to leave the year. But I do think it's very important to have these types of awards at the end to celebrate achievement. So what we did is we took away all coach-given awards, and we turned it back and going back to our values. So what do we preach? We preach team, right? So I want the players to vote on the captains this year. Who did you follow, and who do you credit with pushing this team and being out front? Who do you recognize as that captain? And so, depending on the vote, it could be 3, 4, 5 of those guys. So they would get these big captains award, and then whoever got the most votes, they would be, our Mr. Wolverine or Mr. Eagle or, whatever your mascot is. And that was always a really, really special plaque, and a really special achievement. Your team, your peers are recognizing you. It's never back on the coaches picking favorites and none of that stuff. The other piece was, as we want to recognize and celebrate, our scout team players, our glue guys, if you will, a lot of times those awards don't land either, because players will kind of chuckle and, now all of a sudden I feel like, am I Mr. Tryhard, teacher's pet? But you really, really genuinely want to recognize those guys, so that award wouldn't land either. So we created another category for our unsung heroes. And this one to me became the coolest because, you would find that scout team guy that you want to recognize would always be on there. Maybe that special teams role player, or that faceless offensive lineman who was just always there, never said much, but he was doing his job, helping teammates out. Down to, guys like the 4-year the 4-year member of the program who never really stepped on the field, that senior, but he was always helping the younger guys out and was willing to jump in on scout team and things like that. So that became a really a desired achievement. It landed, it felt good. It took away that kind of stigma around scout team, effort, hustle player, whatever you wanted to call it. So that really helped our banquets out, and it really tied back in. And I'll never forget a parent who was when I had taken over at West, and he goes, man, you have preached team all year, and this right here really shows that is where your priorities are. And so it landed with the parents too. I did find a way to recognize our outstanding performance guys. And the guys who do, the quarterback who threw for 1,000, 5,000 yards or whatever, we just took it off the coaches. So we had outstanding performance awards that were tied back to any third-party recognition. That's where you're all-region, you're all-state, you're max preps, all-American, any of those type of things. We found ways, to recognize and award that. And that way you really are getting a wide kind of range of achievements and celebration. And it just was really cool how that one little kind of change of taking it off the coaches, not because we're scared to do it per se, but because it just never really created the celebration aspect of the year-end banquet that I wanted, and how this really tied back into the message and the values. Again, everything's tethered. Everything needs to be aligned. And, kind of backing that up, into our weekly awards. I don't have a problem with game balls. I always felt like those guys would get recognized in the paper. They get recognized wherever. I was looking for those things that tied back into the more kind of soft skills or the more kind of intangible things. So we had 3 recognitions every week. Coaches would vote on a scout team player of the week, and they would get something on Sunday, swag or a T-shirt or something like that. We looked for a special teams player of the week, tying back into trying to make that emphasis on special teams. And then the one that I really loved is we had our hustle play of the week. And again, like we talked about earlier, that could be the O lineman running down, or the receiver tracking from backside to front side, making that touchdown block, or the backside corner who took great angle and made that tackle on the 1 yard line, and we were able to, we were able to hold them out of the end zones, maybe change the game, and we would always show that play, and the guys would get really excited, and again, just doing our best to go back to what are we emphasizing and how do we reward that. And then I think the last thing, and this really. It does tie back in with some of the things that we preach, but thinking and putting some thought to what your lettering system is, because that can get a little tricky at times too. And I want to take as much ambiguity out of it as I can. But what I found is when you set these parameters around X number of quarters or whatever, kind of midway through the season, the guy who maybe wasn't playing, all of a sudden he can't letter, or so then you fix that by kind of blanketing it and giving just kind of letters out as you see fit. Again, subjective. So we found a kind of happy medium with that, and one was 20 varsity quarters. If you play 20 varsity quarters, that means you're getting in more than just mop up time. You have a role somewhere. That's where that special teams, that sophomore who maybe only plays special teams, he's going to rack up 20 quarters, and that's going to earn him a letter. The other thing was one start. If you sat on the bench for 8 weeks but kept working your tail off, and you moved from fourth on the depth chart to third to second, and now all of a sudden either you've taken over that job or there had been an injury and you got to step up, if you're good enough to start one game for us, you are a letter winner for us. And then the third element of that was, if you got recognized in any of those end-of-year awards, and obviously that meant that you were doing something. But let me back up, because there was almost a buy-in, if you will, to our lettering policy, and that ties back into that first core value that and our North Star of being a man of integrity and things that my administration wanted to see, which was a bigger community involvement. So I wanted to do more community service projects. I wanted to, and it could be community service of just maybe helping our feeder team out or helping people out around the school. But we tied in a 10-hour community service threshold just to be even considered for a letter. And what I found is 10 hours is really not a lot, and there's a million opportunities that you can create for guys to get that. But man, what a good little tool that we had when we needed those guys to show up and maybe work an event for us, or hey, we're doing a cleanup project around the field house. If you guys come in, I'll give you service hours. It was just kind of a neat little kind of mind trick that we were able to find it, but for a good purpose. I mean, you really do want these players to start seeing that there's a whole community around them, and really tying into the things outside of football. But yeah, so those were kind of the parameters we built around our lettering system, and it went from kind of just figuring it out at the end of the year and causing a lot of kind of, I wouldn't say animosity, at times it would, but it made it manageable. It made it kind of easy to see, who actually earned a letter and who didn't. And that way, if you ever had discrepancies at the end of the year, this was stated up front. You knew what our lettering policy was.
There's so much there, and as we've said in the beginning, this is really just a 30,000-foot overview of everything it takes to build this blueprint for the Mpire, and but you're really building something that's built to sustain, built to last over the long term. I want you to speak about that for a little bit.
It's one thing to be good in a short-term period. It's one thing to have that lightning in a bottle, that team that comes in. Maybe it was just you fell into this great collection of players, and you go out and you have success for a year, maybe 2 years, or maybe every so often. But to me, what a program is something that is consistent. I mean, you maybe only reached the mountaintop a couple of times, but you're always showing this consistent level of all the things that we've talked about. And then also something that, is not just tied to a head coach. Something that I heard this a long time ago and really stuck with me. I used to think, the mark of a good leader was, man, look at when I'm at practice and when I'm doing this, everything runs smooth. Man, imagine if I wasn't here, and things would fall apart. And somebody's like, man, well, that's not the sign of a good leader. A good leader is someone who can remove himself and things continue to run almost as if he wasn't there. And that just hit me between the eyes, man. And so we think a lot about, and I reflect a lot about, okay, so how do you build a program like that? And as we outline kind of those first 3 objectives and all those things that should be done yearly, the thing to sustain is kind of that last piece. It's kind of the last phase, the bridge between one year to the next. And that was our reflective process. And I'm sure everybody does some sort of exit interviews, reflective process, something like that. And while there's no, profound magic to the document that I created, there was a systematic approach. And with players and coaches, I would outline, kind of from a holistic view. Hey, this is what how our year ended. These were some objective successes, failures, blah, blah, blah. What do you think got us there? Why good, why bad? Kind of back to that start, stop, continue method is what I'm looking for, very corporate. But then I would break that down from the holistic into the individual kind of elements, whether it just be each phase of the year, going back to winter workout, spring ball, summer. It could be an initiative that we started, kind of when we were building into that second position. Maybe something that we were trying on game days with mindfulness. That was where I was getting feedback. But here was the kind of big piece from that. I used to type this document up and send it out with all of my answers in it. And then what I would get back, I wasn't sure if that was really the reflection of my coaches and my players. So as I would type this up at the end of every year, it would be a framework. I would send it to them. They would fill it out. They would send it back to me. Then they would see my answers. And then we would set up a meeting to meet about that at a later date. And that was such a great way for me to get honest feedback. There was great ways to see, well, hey, maybe there's some misalignment here. And let's speak to that. And it could have been something that I was missing, or it could have been an issue with communication of, this isn't working or this didn't, go well. Well, it's because of, whatever. And now let's figure out ways that we can either improve this process or remove this process as we go forward. And what's really cool is I look back on those and it really, we talk about blueprint. Those meetings, as I look back on them and reread those things, really kind of recapture and then forecast a lot of the roadmap that we went down over, that 8-year period. So that reflective piece, and that helps you then learn from this past year and then start to plan for the next year. You're outlining, okay, here are our new objectives. What is potentially our new common purpose? What do we need to be focused on with this team to make sure that we achieve in order to have the success? What does the schedule present? What are the other logistical issues? And that gets into kind of how we break it down into a 9-part season. Definitely would love to put that in the notes for the coaches without going through it right now. But, you're just looking at every phase of that season, and I'm talking about the year now, and you're basically outlining your objectives and your priorities to make sure you hit those. So that's how you do it from year to year. But if you really, really, really want to drive this thing deep into the studs of it, it really comes back into that most important leadership team I talked about, your staff. And I think any successful head coach over a long period of time has a great understanding of how to A, develop his staff, and B, manage his staff. So I think about that first from the development piece. We talked a lot about earlier about how to get somebody to buy into a role, and that's, again, purpose, autonomy, mastery. Well, now there also needs to be some type of mentorship with that. And it ties in so nicely, because when you really look at what does somebody need to really feel supported, and feel confident in attacking a new role, and maybe a role that they desire, is you want to help them set expectations, right? You want to give them assurance. So you're building that confidence of, hey, I know I might be asking you to do something that you maybe have never done, but I've seen this, and this, that I think that you can attack this. And oh, by the way, we're going to make sure that we give you direction on what steps to take. Again, that figure it out mindset, that's down the road. That's after you have understood your role and you've been doing it for a while, and now I don't want you to have to go into a new role and say, hey, figure it out. So I want to make sure he feels that direction. So that kind of ties back into that mastery piece, right? Okay, I understand what is needed of me. There's the objections, and this is how I get there, right? Or the expectations, and this is how I get there. And then the last piece of that is he wants to feel supported, right? So we got some type of support. And that can be something as small as, hey, man, you're new to this software that we use on this team. Let's make sure somebody's here to help you out. Hey, there's an onboarding process of, I know these core values are new language to you. Let me make sure I have a coach who can sit down with you. And this is how we like to run our practices. This is what our 2-whistle system is. Instead of just leaving somebody, to figure all that stuff out, because it's a lot. And I just think some conversations around that can truly help you become, I call it a formula for mentorship. Then another piece of that, as you're building and pouring into your coaches, and this is, if you're doing this right now, you got to stop it. If your coaches see you as somebody who would put roadblocks up for their success and their ability to move on and advance their career because you're scared of losing them, well, guess what? You've already lost them. Part of our reflective process as I go back, the last piece was I wanted you to talk about, what were your successes, how can I help, and what are your goals going forward? And part of that was I want to know earnestly, are you looking at are you a position coach looking to be a coordinator because, hey, we've got our coordinators here. Are you a coordinator looking to become a head coach? Talk to me. The last thing I want is to be blindsided, but the biggest thing I want is to help you. Having interview prep with my coordinators before they go, or sitting down and talking about how to build out offensive game plans with maybe a receivers coach who wants to be a coordinator. I want to do those things with you. I want you to feel that I'm the first person you should ask and talk to help you advance in your career. And I'll be your biggest fan and your biggest cheerleader. It's going to suck to lose you. We love you, but go kick some butt, man. I want guys like that. And then what I find is those guys won't leave unless they really have a good opportunity. The last piece of your staff is then managing it. And you're going to be faced with some tough decisions. And I think this is where a lot of leaders fail. We become friends. There's an intimate relationship. There's hard conversations to have. How do you know when it's time to make a move? And I have 3 questions that I ask myself. 1, is this coach competent? Can he actually do the role that we've asked him to do? 2, is this coach putting in the appropriate amount of effort? He could be competent, but if for some reason we're not solving these problems, is he working appropriately to figure that out? And then 3, and this is a big one, is he maintaining alignment with my definition and my vision for that role? If I can answer yes to all 3 of those, then we go back to the mentorship phase. We got to figure out together what's going on. And again, it could be any number of things. It could have been just, hey, bad luck this year. You had some great ideas. They didn't work out. We've all been there. We would all love that type of grace, that kind of ability to not be prisoner of the short-term result, because we got a very capable guy who's working his tail off. He's doing everything he can for this program. You don't want to lose that guy. Go help him figure it out. But if we're missing any of those things, if there's a no to any one of those, you got to make a move. And it could just be moving him to a new position, or it could be moving on from him, especially if it's question 3, But as long as you're assured that you have had those conversations, you've went through the development phase, you've set those expectations, you've defined that role, you're communicating your vision, you make sure you've done those things. And then you consult those 3 questions, and I think it gives you your answers pretty easily on how to manage your staff there. And unfortunately, there's sometimes that we got to make decisions. Doesn't mean that you're a bad coach. It means that maybe you're not the coach that's fit for this position right now, and that's okay.
Well, hearing you outline all that, it's clear why you've had multiple examples of building programs that have lasted beyond your tenureship there. So in conclusion here, we just spent collectively about 2 hours between part 1 and part 2, outline a lot. if you wouldn't mind, just summarize the three key elements here to building this blueprint for an empire for our coaches out there.
Right. So again, just to take it back to kind of the central theme of this, there's three main objectives that you need to attack as soon as you get this role, right? And some of it should be done beforehand, and some of it is going to be done simultaneously, and some of it you're going to build to. But you need to be thinking about these three things. Number one always starts with casting that vision. Okay, you want to maintain or make sure that you create clarity around the foundations that this program is going to stand for and be built on. What are you willing to get fired over? Basically, we're going to maintain these things. This is where I'm staking my flag. Then you've got to get that communicated to everyone. I mean, the further you can make people feel that to the outer reaches of your organization, the better you're going to be. The only way you do that is through effectively leading your leadership teams. And that's how you drive that alignment, which I think, again, is ultimately the single greatest factor, because if you cast a vision with nobody to help you spread it, it's just going to be an idea. If you have people who are driving it and are constantly aligned with it, who are also giving you feedback for where the evolutions need to happen, now you're going to start getting people to buy into that vision. And then the third piece is you've got to have great system strategies and tools that are going to help you drive the desired behavior and produce the type of results that are going to be able to keep you in that job. And I feel like if you're doing those three things and you're keeping those on front of the brain, you may have some peaks and valleys and there may be some hiccups along the way, but this is a great formula for how somebody can go in, build something, and sustain it for the long haul.
Coaches, we're going to have a lot of resources available for you on the website, including documents that Coach Clack's used for his reflection process, for his player evaluation, a copy of the program books he put together during the interview process for several of the programs he coached for, and many, many more. So, and be on the lookout. Like I said, this is a high-level overview of the blueprint for building an Mpire, but we're going to be coming out with a lot more classes that will dive deeper into each of these topics that we talked about. So thank you all for your time. Hope you enjoyed this and found this very informational. And coaches, we'll see you around soon.